Hi, it's Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is March 12th, 2021. I am recording here on Sanibel Island in Florida. My guest this week is in Kingston, Ontario, a little further north from here, Chris Bailey, whose Audible original lasts just over 3 hours, but might add years to your life and minutes to your day. Fascinating conversation, and the topic was meditation, which is also the subject of his latest Audible original. Also, we'll have some conversation about what's ahead for antitrust prosecution, possibly for Amazon and other big tech companies, based on some new players emerging in Washington, D.C. And tech tip, there's a connection between Halo, the band that I wear, the health band, and Alexa. Also, Vesta, Amazon's home robot, seems to be getting nearer to the day when I might have a chance to try it. Oh, I can't wait. First up in news, I really trust the reporting in The Information. That's a subscription-based tech publication that Nick Wingfield is involved with, and it's been going on for several years. Really solid stuff. They have a piece that was published March 10th, What Big Tech Antitrust Foe Lina could do at the FTC. This is by Josh Sisco. The story here is that Lina, who is now a law professor, is likely to be nominated to the Federal Trade Commission by President Biden. Now, I've talked about her in the past. In 2017, January 2017, she authored a legal article at the Yale Law Journal, and that was about how antitrust could be used to prevent Amazon from extending its dominance to new businesses. And as she looks like she is in line to be on the FTC, which is one of the sources for antitrust cases which can be brought against companies, this piece is saying, well, what are the chances that we really are just about to see some real movement on the antitrust topic? Now, it points out that there are 5 members on this FTC, and if Khan is appointed, she might very well say, I'm not going to accept this unless I'm sure that there are going to be two other Democrats on the commission that would agree with her ideas about antitrust, and therefore that there could actually be some cases brought. So that's an unknown at this point. And then the other unknown is if the FTC were to take a case against Amazon or someone else, how would it fare in the courts? And that is a whole different issue, which would play out probably over quite a long period of time. 4 years ago in her article, which I read at the time, it's a long article, and it strikes me as very academic. It's hard to follow, to tell you the truth. But the essence of it is that regulators should simply abandon long-held views of antitrust law to address the growing dominance of online companies like Amazon. And last fall, Lina Khan co-wrote the House of Representatives' 450-page antitrust report, and that leaned heavily on her earlier paper. I find it fascinating that an academic paper published in a law journal 4 years ago is now kind of at the center of actions that might actually be taken against Amazon and possibly other companies. Her article was titled Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, and the argument was that antitrust shouldn't just be on our consumers being harmed by market dominance by prices that are higher than they would be if there was good competition, and extending it to, is this market dominance hurting competitors? That's the essence of the article. She says, yes, there should be that shift. It will be intriguing to see what happens. This article says that if this happens, a case against Amazon could potentially render the company unrecognizable. And this could involve things like the forced sale of Amazon Web Services, AWS, which she has maintained represents a core conflict of interest because AWS sells cloud services that to companies that compete with Amazon, like Netflix and Target. Since I was thinking about this topic, I brought it up at supper tonight with Darlene and her sister Deb. I asked Darlene, do you think Amazon should be broken up into pieces? And she said, well, Jeff Bezos is now moving on. He's going to become chairman instead of CEO this year. And so the company is now going to be run by other people. If he was still running it, she said, I would be less inclined to think it's a good idea to break it up because I think that, he thought up the company, he created the company, he seemed to have some passion and integrity in how he ran it. And so in general, she would think better to just keep it intact. But now it's being run by faceless people that maybe all they want to do is make money, and maybe it is too big. So I thought that was fascinating because I think she's really on an intuitive level is perceiving something which could be a big factor in what happens to Amazon, namely the shift in Jeff Bezos' role. There was another article in the information. This one was Why Tech Breakups Could Be Good for Shareholders. This was a tech briefing by Martin Peters. March 11th, actually. That was recent. And the idea was that Amazon, in particular, would likely be worth at least twice as much divided into 2, 3, or 4 pieces, he wrote. AWS alone, a standalone company, could be worth $1 trillion, and so these various pieces like merchant service, the fact that people sell things on Amazon.com, that could be a huge business. And then entertainment, Prime Video, IMDb, Amazon Studios, he said that could likely surpass Netflix in revenue. So if you own some Amazon stock, as I do, there are big issues about what's good for society, and I think we certainly care about that. But if I think the rather unlikely scenario were to unfold over the next 5 to 10 years and Amazon was broken up, the stockholders of the original company might be the ones that were the big winners. I'm not sure that would be what Lina Khan would have had in mind, but it could be the result. Last news story I want to talk to you about is Vesta. Now, this is the secret home robot. Not so secret. I've seen stories about it in the past, but there was a report in the New York Post. Let's see. Now, I think this was sort of quoting Business Insider. I can't see the Insider piece because it's behind a paywall, but they seem to be the source of it. They talked to 6 people directly involved in the project and got some pretty juicy information about it. Namely, more than 800 employees are working on this new home robot, and some of the people they spoke with fear it's going to be an expensive flop. It's described as a Roomba-like device that will roll around home following the owner's voice. And it's one prototype is 10 to 13 inches wide. It has a screen. It has a microphone. I guess there are lots of microphones on it. A compartment to carry objects, and it might have a retractable pole-mounted camera to help someone find their keys and wallet remotely. They're speculating that it might be at first on an invite-only basis. That's how a lot of Amazon products are being tested these days. And that the cost could be upwards of $1,000. So an expensive thing to be trying out, but of course I will if I have any kind of a chance. It's interesting that they've got people saying, oh, this might be like the iPhone. It could be a big flop. Well, if Vesta is the kind of flop that the Fire Phone was, it would lead to the next big thing, namely Alexa. I think a lot of people can see a direct line between Amazon not being able to develop a phone to ending up developing Alexa and the smart assistant. I don't know. I mean, obviously that's a lot of money to be it would be a niche market, but maybe these things are like Elon Musk when he rolled out the Tesla. The first one was very expensive, all-electric sports car, basically. And then the next ones were less expensive and all the way down to the Model 3, the one that we own. So maybe Vesta ends up coming in as kind of a high-end device, and they learn a lot about it. Now, when they say there's a camera on it, I immediately think of this new Echo Show 10 that I have here in the dining room here at the rental house, which follows you around. And that, I bet, was part of Lab 126 figuring out how that part of a robot might look, if it can look around at the sound of your voice and it can head off in a direction because it knows where you are. This Echo Show clearly can tell, are we on the dining room side of the room or are we on the kitchen side of the room? And it'll just pivot around and listen to us as if it has a mind of its own. So you can see these pieces coming together, and I hope they come together soon, because it's going to be pretty fascinating to see what sorts of things an Alexa robot might be able to do in the home. For the tech tip, I have a couple of updates on the Halo Health Band, which I've been trying since, I think in the summer. And one is that it now can talk with our friend Alexa. You go into the Halo app on the smartphone, which I did, and you enable it. It's an opt-in capability. Normally what I do with Halo, the main data that I'm interested in is my sleep score. And the night before last, I got a 66, which is the highest I've had since I had the band, almost a year, actually. And that was wonderful. Boy, I was alert all day. Today, I got a 30. So my drill is to get up, sitting on the side of the bed, get my iPhone, and see what the Halo score is. Because I now have it synchronized with the Echo Show here, I think I can just do this. I'm trying this for the first time. Alexa, what was my sleep score?
Last night, your sleep score was 29 points.
29? I thought the app said 30. Alexa, how active have I been this week?
So far this week, you've been active for 2 hours and 51 minutes, earning 271 activity points.
Alexa, how has my tone been today?
So far today, you've had 10 notable moments and sounded sad in 16% of your phrases.
So it's picking up the ability to get information that the Halo Band sends to my iPhone. There's no special display of the charts, which are very interesting. There's a lot of detailed data, especially on the sleep. It doesn't show up on the screen of the Echo Show, but she will, give an up-to-date report. And I don't think I want to hear it from her in the morning. I think I'm going to still turn to my iPhone and check out the chart and see, how much REM sleep and deep sleep and all this. The details of my sleep are of interest to me. Another aspect of the Halo, which I've been disappointed in, is when you charge it, you take it off. I've got it on my right wrist, and you put it into kind of a dock. And it doesn't immediately turn the light on to show that it's charging. I've tapped it. I've done all kinds of things to try to get this thing so that it can receive the charge from the charger. So I finally called up Amazon, and I used the help feature of the Halo app itself. So I got somebody who had a Halo Band on. He said, oh, yes, that's a problem, and here's what I've done. And what he did simply was, when the band is in the dock, he squeezes the top and the bottom of the dock to just make sure that the band itself isn't keeping the contacts from actually touching. And once there is a contact and the light goes on, then it charges up just fine. I've seen other people complain about this, so I think it's a kind of a known problem. There's a report in The Verge that the Halo Band is out of stock on Amazon.com. It's still available at other retailers like Best Buy, and that it has a 3.7-star rating from Amazon customers compared with 4.6-star rating from Fitbit. There was a really, I thought, lame review of it in the Washington Post by Greg Fowler that it was... I guess have I gone off on this? Is this a rant I've already shared with you? In case I already have, I won't say. But I think that some of the coverage by tech reporters has been a little bit unfair. I mean, I remember when tech reporters said that the Kindle was like the ugliest thing they'd ever seen and nothing would ever come of this. So you don't have to trust these tech reporters in their first impressions. But I think reviews you can put a little more stock in, and that 3.7 could have something to do with the fact that the charger's been a little bit funky, which is something that I've seen. They keep updating the, you can have it read your tone of voice, and you get information on that. The sleep, I see that the sleep chart that I get is being updated, so it's being improved, and there are all these little tools that I have used some of them about how to fall asleep better or stay awake through the night, which is really what my problem is. It's not so much falling asleep. And I think it's good. I am in, and I probably have a 6-month free trial of it that is about to end, and I'll be paying. It's pretty reasonable monthly charge after that. And now, if I want to, I can have Alexa tell me information about my various stats. Time now for the interview. Chris Bailey's Audible original, a 3-hour audio retreat released in January, is titled How to Train Your Mind, Exploring the Productivity Benefits of Meditation. After listening to it for the first time, I reached out to David Blum, editor-in-chief of Audible Originals, to see if he could help me book Chris for the podcast. A couple of referrals later, I was on Chris's schedule, so I listened to the retreat a second time. Even better, the result of spending these 6+ hours listening to his calm, crisp, humorous, and practical approach to meditation is that I, in fact, have more than doubled my daily meditation practice to an hour. The way I'm doing it is I start with a 15-minute sit when I wake up, followed by 3 5-minute meditations and 3 10-minute meditations spread out during the day. And I use those shorter ones like video game power-ups to restore my sanity when I'm in the red zone or overreacting somehow or in some kind of turmoil, or to get tuned up for a work session or an important conversation like an interview for the show. My actual sitting is much less formal than what I practiced as a Zen student 20 years ago in Denver. No zafu, no crossed legs or mudra hand positions. I just sit in a chair, sip coffee sometimes, listen to birds out on the lanai, or take a break at my desk looking out at the golf course here. And if Deb or Darlene ask me a question, I don't say, shh, I'm meditating. I'm just sitting. I'm following my breath, and it's all kind of normal, stepping back from the thoughts as they arise. Chris, on his website, reveals that his meditation practice also has roots in Buddhist practice, and he clearly knows his way around a Zendo, but he doesn't consider himself an overly spiritual person, he says on the recording, and his take on meditation is informed by 10 years devoted to studying and writing about ways to improve personal productivity. You know, at first I thought this was, I bristled at this in a way similar to my reaction to the term secular meditation, which was used by Greg Epstein, Harvard's humanist pastor, when I talked with him earlier this year. Because I spent so much time meditating in a Buddhist setting, I thought, well, you can't just take the meditation away without all the 1,000 years of Zen monks and all this doing that stuff. But it turns out you can. And what do you know? After sitting in judgment on poor Greg, I would find myself deeply inspired by 3 hours of secular meditation by any other name, which is what I heard on this Audible original. I'm deeply grateful for everything I learned as a Zen student, and I'm glad Chris Bailey showed me a way to integrate that experience into my life now in a new way. He and I connected by Zoom between here on Sanibel and his home in Kingston, Ontario, earlier this week. Here is our conversation. Your Audible original, I see that it's rated 4.6 with 1,200 ratings on Audible, so it's off to a pretty good start. 54 days since it was launched on Audible. Let's just set the table here as to what this is about, and I'm very curious. How did the project start? Did Audible approach you, or vice versa? What was the birth of this fairly unusual use of the audiobook medium for, as you say, a retreat. So what are we doing here, and how did it start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's always so refreshing when you chat with somebody for an interview that's done their research and listened to the book and things like that. So thank you on behalf of me and probably your listeners, because it probably makes for a better show as well. Essentially, I had this idea for a project. It was a smaller idea by necessity, right? So one of the most difficult parts about writing a book is figuring out just how long the book should be. And you see this a lot in the business book space, which is what I traditionally publish in, where you get some person who has an idea, but it's a smaller idea. It's probably more of an article for the Harvard Business Review or something than a book. And so you end up listening to the book, and it's all filler. It's all stories. It's all things like that. And so that's the challenge of when you have the conception of an idea, to figure out just how big of an idea it is. And this one around the productivity benefits of meditation, it was one that I like to expand my ideas before I figure out what format they should reside in, because some ideas deserve to be a blog post. Some ideas are a bit bigger and they deserve to be an op-ed. But then you have between sort of the op-ed or the long-form article this gap that exists between the long-form article and a traditionally published book. And when I started to expand on this idea of, okay, what are the productivity benefits of meditation? Because I like to meditate for productivity reasons and experience all the other ones as an offshoot of that. I began to expand it, and I realized it was somewhere in between that long-form article and a traditionally published book. And at the same time, I wanted to make it a bit more interactive, because it's a book on meditation. And so what an incredible opportunity, if it's an audio-only format, to put a few guided meditations in, kind of make things a bit more personal, because meditation is, when you mention the word to people, people think like, man, I don't want to become a monk and give up all my worldly possessions to meditate all day long. What's the value in that? And so like it's a friendlier, more personal medium in which one can be more vulnerable. And it's also more interactive. And so all the stars kind of aligned, and it made sense that it would exist as an Audible original, which is what we published it as. And I think my agent suggested to me that we suggest the project to Andrew at Audible, Andrew Eisenman, who's been incredible to work with for this thing. And the rest is, I don't want to say history, because like you said, it's 50-some days old, but people seem to be receptive to the project so far, which is really exciting to see.
And I think the stars did align, because when I talked with David Blum about Audible originals, he was sort of coming in on that space in terms of length. He'd done something almost kind of similar at Kindle Singles on the Kindle side. So you two were approaching from the content side and the platform side with exactly the same kind of space in mind, it sounds like.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I've talked to my editors at Penguin about this idea too, where they'll say that one of the biggest challenges with acquiring a book or acquiring a manuscript, a nonfiction one where the book isn't written out ahead of time, is figuring out how long the book and the idea should be. And so it's lovely that there's a place that we can go to where, I don't know, I'd feel kind of weird putting out a little hardcover book that's like 100 pages long. I feel like people would think, man, you're supposed to be this productivity guy. You should try harder. Write longer.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it came out at 3 hours and 18 minutes as you moved into it. And then at one point you talk about minimizing fluff and you talk about productivity porn, which I thought was a great term. Yeah. Were there some stories that out of following your mission to keep it concise, you just had to not tell, and that you'd have a chance to tell now if you want? Oh, yeah.
So for when I sit down to write a project, First of all, I'm going to disappoint, and I can't think of any stories. But
Yeah,
when
that's
I
all right.
sat down to write a project, I entered. It's hard to explain, kind of like a fugue-like state,
Yeah.
where it's a flow-like state, I guess you could say, where I become immersed in the writing, but kind of like watching a movie that you can't remember after you just watch the thing, even though it was a super captivating experience. Sometimes it seems like when I watch a movie, the more captivating the movie is, the less I remember what happened in that movie because I was so immersed in the moment and maybe processing it a bit differently. And I've always thought writing is a similar thing. When you get into that flow state, I can almost never recall what I write after I write it. It's reading it back a few times that aids in that recollection for me, because it really is not a stream of thought. Nobody wants to hear my unedited streams of thoughts. I can almost guarantee you, Len. But at the same time, it's in that polishing after that something is interesting. But that's the fascinating thing about meditation is almost the purpose of meditation is to step back from the stories we tell ourselves, both about the world around us and the thoughts that reside inside our own mind. And so it's almost an area, and this can be a challenge about writing about the process, that it can almost be difficult to tell stories, even though stories are what Audible originals are all about on a big level, and what people remember from anything that they listen to. And so that was a fun part. So the stories often revolved around how people relate to meditation. I remember one of them, there's a fell on a plane when I was flying to a retreat center in Cranbrook, British Columbia, I think that is the name. I always mix up the names of small Canadian cities. But essentially the conversation went to what we were going to Cranbrook to do. And there's a beautiful retreat center, clear sky, meditation retreat center, where you can essentially live in a cabin for a week, uninterrupted. I forget if there's power. I don't think there's power. There was power in the cabin, but it's okay because you disconnect for that time. And he was one of those folks I mentioned off the top, the misconceptions that many of us have surrounding meditation. He was one that thought, okay, this guy is a total hippie that's sitting next to me on the plane. This guy is probably a part of a cult because he's into this meditation thing. Obviously a fella that maybe didn't grow up in the 60s when this stuff was brought to the Western world by people like Sharon Salzberg and folks like that. But it's just fascinating the different ways that people relate to the idea of meditation itself and the misconceptions we have going into the practice. That was a very rewarding part about writing the book, is just cutting through all that BS. I think that's kind of my job as an author, to explore these different various spaces on the behalf of somebody who stumbles upon something that I'm writing, to do a lot of work on their behalf, cut through the BS, figure out what they need to know about a given thing. And it turns out there's a lot to know about meditation that can help us out.
That's interesting. The work of stepping back from your thoughts or from the story, there's a tension there because you're telling a story in this form, so you've got kind of some creative tension there. I experience some creative tension on sort of the listener side because I usually am doing things when I'm listening to an Audible book. I'm washing the dishes, I'm driving, and it felt kind of disloyal to you and your message to be driving along, doing the dishes, listening to how I should be mindful about doing all this. And I ended up thinking, well, I really want, and I listened to it twice, by the way. It was interesting to go all the way through.
You must be sick of hearing from me by now.
No.
Why'd you even schedule this interview? You must be so tired of my voice.
No, your voice is a lot of the message too. I'm sure you've been told that because something comes through the voice which really resonates with your meditation and things like that. So no, I have not had enough of your voice yet. But what do you make of that? That would you really urge people that are serious about what you have to say in this to perhaps consume it in a different way than they do most of their audio material, and actually sit down in a chair and listen mindfully?
That's a really good question, because I think so much of the job of a project like this one is you have to meet people where they are. And that's a big reason why I came at this from this productivity angle is I think, honestly, you need to sell the practical, tactical benefits of meditation for somebody to open up their mind to the practice, especially somebody who is steeped in traditional Western values, growth and accumulating more and accomplishing more and becoming more productive. But I think, this is honestly not something I've thought too much about, but my hope with the project is that the tone in which I communicate these messages that are found in the Audible original sets the tone for how somebody should listen to the book. And so hopefully it's a calming tone, and that can dictate the circumstances in a way that's subconscious in which somebody should be listening to the title. Maybe not doing some vigorous workout, the pumping weights and hopping on and off your Peloton. Maybe it's a slower thing. Maybe it's simple, mindless activities. And I think mindless is the key there. People like to be busy doing something when they listen to an audiobook or else I think they'd pick up a physical book. I think that's the job that somebody can hire a physical book to do for them, is when they want to delve into an idea totally, completely, analytically, thoughtfully, deeply. They can pick up a hardcover book or a softcover book. But in my eyes, audio is a format in which we can allow ideas to wash over our mind like waves, and over time, with enough ideas communicated in a way, it can be kind of like waves washing over a rock over a number of years, where you get that smoothness with time and you change in a way that you can't explain, but it's because of the fact that these ideas were able to wash over you. And so that's kind of maybe an overly philosophical way of communicating what my intention was with the tone. The tone of a project like this, it's like the typography of a book. It's the cover of a book. It's everything. It's your entire relationship with somebody. And so it's my hope that by having that calm presence in the reading, that somebody would want to cultivate a calm presence when they're listening to the title and slow down a little bit, do something mindless that maybe needs to be done, folding the laundry, doing some stretches, doing the dishes, sweeping up around the house, instead of that vigorous thing, because it just creates a dissonance when there's that mismatch.
I think I was doing the dishes on some of it, and there was some kind of a story I read or heard. Brother Lawrence, he was a sort of a monk of the old days, and he was known at whatever monastery he was at for doing the dishes in an incredibly mindful, prayerful way. So often when I do the dishes, I'm thinking, well, is this Brother Lawrence? And now it's going to be, am I doing the dishes the way Chris Bailey would do them? Would Chris wash the fork next or this plate? You want to really focus in on these things.
Chris puts it all in the dishwasher.
Oh, mindfully.
Very mindfully, yeah. Chris is very lazy, so he gets the dishwasher to do the dishes for him.
Well, all right. Well, that's a good segue to this really powerful, intriguing idea that you have that really keying in. I mean, I've got an MBA, and so I can see the mindset here of, the HBR review. 1 minute of meditation gets you 9 minutes of extra productivity in your life. And you've got a quite organized way to come up with that number. But to me, it's a fascinating concept that this is an activity that almost creates time in your life. And at one point you talk about how much of our life we spend not noticing, and if you could increase the percentage that you notice, you'd be adding years to your life. But let's just key in on that and kind of make the case based on what you've read in the science and your own experiments. Mm-hmm. Why does meditating actually increase productivity?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? And when you're talking about productivity, and you mentioned productivity porn before, my benchmark for any good productivity strategy is for every minute you spend on it, how many minutes do you make back? Because if you're just reading about somebody's daily routine, like Oprah or Richard Branson, how they spend their day, oh, wouldn't that be great if we were all Oprah or Richard Branson, interviewing Prince Harry in the morning or whatever that fella's name is, and then relaxing at our mansion in the evening with a team of servants or housekeepers or whatever, people doting on us throughout the day. We can't really make use of lessons like that, and lessons like that don't necessarily make us earn back time. One of the best strategies for earning back time is planning out our day, setting a few intentions at the start of the day for what we want to accomplish over the span of that time. I think next to maybe only meditation, that as knowledge workers, that's one of the best things that we can do for our productivity, because we decide what we want to become productive on. And in that way, I think for every minute we spend planning, we earn many, many, many more back. It's impossible to quantify all this, right? Because it's so difficult to quantify knowledge work. If we're writing for a living and we write 500 words one day and 1,000 the next, we may not be twice as productive that second day if we just write garbage. And the 500 words that we wrote on the previous day were the Gettysburg Address, for an example. The shortest, most influential speeches in American history. But between that schedule of Oprah's day, reading about that, and planning out your day, there exists a gradient of how much time we make back by investing in different productivity strategies. And so I've kind of nominated myself in a way to be this guy that filters through the advice out there, to find the things that work well when we do knowledge work for a living. And this was how meditation came onto my radar as a productivity strategy. I stopped meditating because I developed this strong interest in productivity. But I realized along that little journey right there that I focused a lot less deeply. My mind wandered more often. I tended to more stimulus throughout the day that overstimulated my mind, which made me more susceptible to distraction. I could focus less on what was in front of me, and the research bears all these things out, that when we meditate frequently on a daily basis, our working memory capacity expands by about 30%. We can process more in every moment. Our mind wandering time goes down. The average across the world, the human average, is 47% of the day when our mind is wandering. And we need this, right? We can't reflect and focus at the same time. That includes all our reflection time, but a lot of that's unintentional as well. Meditation has been shown there's so many benefits of the practice. It makes us less impulsive. And impulsiveness is the character trait that is most highly correlated with procrastination. It lets us see things clearly because we don't see the world through the clouded lens of expectation. We see the world as it is, as it unfolds in front of us. It makes us happier. Research by Sean Achor, a Harvard-trained happiness psychologist, found that happier people are 31% more productive than everyone else. Stress falls off of us, right? Maybe not completely. Maybe it leaves some traces, but we don't attach to it, right? So it helps us with procrastination. It helps us become more empathetic because we can relate better to the different people we're conversing with and just being with on a regular basis, even if that's over Zoom these days. It makes us more mindful, especially mindfulness meditation, right? By God, you would hope that would make you more mindful. So that lets us focus for longer, makes our mind wander less because we notice more often that our mind has wandered because it exists mindfulness. You just notice things like this. So we can get back on track more quickly. One study by Gloria Mark, who's an attentional researcher, she studies procrastination deeply. She found that on average, when we're totally derailed off of something that we're focusing on, it takes us about 26 minutes to get back on track and working on that original thing again. And we work on 2.26 other tasks in between. And so we don't just get derailed once, we derail ourselves a second time and maybe another time after that. And so what that means, there's a good example right there of a numerical return on a meditation practice. Okay, if you meditate for 25 minutes, that's a long time. That's a lot of work. But if you notice just one time over the span of the entire day, that you are about to fall into a pit of distraction because an Instagram notification came up on your phone, and then you resist in that moment because you develop the capacity to do so because your mind is less stimulated too, you've just earned it back in that one moment. And an unfortunate truth about our work is that it tends to expand to fit how much time we have available for its completion. This is also known in some productivity circles as Parkinson's law. And so we tend to a lot of busy work that makes us feel important because, as I mentioned, doing knowledge work, we don't have as much of an awareness over how much we accomplish. And so instead, at the end of the day, we look to how busy we were. We look to how much work we did rather than how we move things forward. But meditation, it's such a simple practice, right? And maybe to explain it quickly, you just notice your breath, right? You just notice the ebbs and flows and the temperatures and where it goes inside of you. And the breath is very, very boring. It's like staring at a wall. There's a lamp behind me. Maybe that lamp would be more interesting than my breath. But that's the point, right? If you can focus on your breath, you can focus on anything. And then when you become better at meditation and you become engaged with your breath, you can become engaged with pretty much anything. You can sit down and just write. You can have a coffee with a friend and just chat. You can sit down and open up your email and go through it in a methodical fashion without getting derailed 1,000 times. When an email makes you uncomfortable, then you go over to stimulate your mind and check Facebook, right? And so I feel I've covered a lot of ground with this answer, but the summation of all of these things easily, in an instant, makes back 9 minutes for every minute you spend meditating. It's a no-brainer, right? And that's very, very conservative. I tried to be conservative in my estimates in the book because of the fact that I want to create buy-in for people listening to this, that I'm not messing around. I'm not BSing them. I took a very, very conservative approach in that 9 minutes. I think it could be very much more than that. Now, obviously, there's a point of diminishing returns, right? If you have an 8-hour workday, you can't meditate for 7 hours and 59 minutes. Work takes time in addition to attention and energy. Those are kind of what I see as the 3 ingredients of productivity: time, attention, and energy. Things just take time sometimes. If you're entering data into a spreadsheet, you can't enter a mountain of data in 1 minute.
Yeah, right.
But when you optimize for attention in addition to time, that is when you level up and become far, far more productive and accomplished at the end of the day.
I get the benefits of being able to step back from my thoughts, which return to the breath. There's a thought, return to the breath, return to the breath. And over time, years, does someone who meditates have fewer thoughts that they have to step back from? Or is the thought generation just sort of part of the way the mind works? And the skill here, like, working out, where you're working a muscle that enables you to step back from the thoughts toward what you want to focus on, toward what's really happening. There's sort of, I guess that's just my question. I mean, does the river of thoughts that you have to step away from slow down, or are you simply able to step back from something that's fairly constant in most people's experience?
Yeah, so the value of a thought, I think, depends on whether it is, researchers kind of divide thoughts into 2 different categories. The first is task-related thoughts, and the second is task-unrelated thoughts. And not all task-unrelated thoughts are bad, right? We might be having a conversation, and I might be hopefully not thinking about something else at the same time, but maybe there's a pause or something like that, and I think, wait, maybe I should order this for dinner tonight, which might provide me with a lot of meaning, actually. But I think as first of all, there's no kind of spigot in our mind that we can turn off and flip a switch and say, oh, wow, I've got so much focus. I'm not generating these thoughts in response to what happens, but the mind is, for the most part, a reactive organ where something external will happen and our mind will generate thinking in response to that external stimulus, whether that is a conversation whether we're having, whether that's something we observe visually. And so I think over time, as we develop a skill of understanding our thoughts, we can trace the line back to the original stimulus that set off that chain reaction. And in that way, we can't really shut off the spigot, but we can relate to the impulsive thoughts that our mind generates automatically, both conscious and subconscious. So, one example, you might just be going on a walk and you might see a beautiful dog or something. I don't know. I'm just coming up with this extemporaneously. You might see a dog and you thought, oh, we've been meaning to buy a dog. What if we bought or got a German Shepherd? I should text my wife. And then you start fantasizing about what it would be like with a dog and how that might not work because you travel a lot for work. Then you might think, okay, how can we think about when travel comes back? How can we? And so seeing one dog, that external stimulus sets you on this course of a chain reaction to this fantasy of what it would be like to have a dog. You fall into this 47% of our time in which we're daydreaming over the course of the day. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? We can come up with a lot of ideas when we set off on those chain reactions, but there is a certain superpower in noticing what chain of thoughts led to some idea, some fantasy, some thought that you get caught up in, and tracing that back from the original stimulus. And you realize at a certain point that the large predominance of our thoughts relate to the stimulus that we put in front of us. This is why, our minds tend to be more overactive these days, because we just have more stimulus. We have more stimulus when we scroll through Twitter, especially when these algorithmically driven websites that understand our interests put the things that are most novel at the top, because the more novel a stimulus is, the more dopamine it'll release, the more series of chain reactions that it'll set off in our head, the more addictive it becomes, and the more enmeshed in our thoughts we become. But in that way, meditation is this beautiful practice to not only understand the chain of thoughts, but destimulate our mind, because the only stimulus when we're sitting down on the meditation cushion are the breath, which is boring. And so we pay attention to the thoughts in our head, which are more interesting. But then when we notice that our mind has got caught up in thought, we realign it to the breath once again. And so it's, I don't think, it's a very circuitous way of answering your question, I realize, but I don't think we can shut off that spigot. Our mind is this reactive organ. But, if we can shut off the spigot, we could reach enlightenment in an instant. Right. But we can understand the structure of the thought patterns in our mind, and that's a beautiful place to get to.
Well, and it really points toward, I think you make a reference to disconnect rituals, no internet from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And, I've tried all kinds of, no net till noon, I've told myself. I can't check any of this stuff till noon. And so what you're saying, when you see the power of the stimulus to generate the thoughts, and that can have a bad effect on productivity and just enjoyment of life. What's your current disconnect ritual where you're consciously trying to lessen the number of stimuli that generate these chains, which can get in the way of things that you'd rather be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So every day, I disconnect from the internet between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. And this is, honestly, it's one of my favorite rituals that I've developed. And especially, the kind of work I do, which is more public facing, there's probably more novel stimulus that get that I could look at every day. I could just check book sales, I could check reviews, I can check email, I can check social media. There's just more to check, which ironically, writing about meditation makes the process of settling the mind a bit more difficult. And so I should say, first of all, that I am privileged in that I'm an entrepreneur, and so I have a bit more leeway into how I can structure my day. I have a small team that I can delegate certain tasks to. But I try to stay away from email for as long as I possibly can, just because that's not where I create. Email is kind of where we talk about our work rather than where we make progress with our work, because when we're emailing, we're not creating, especially in my case where I get paid to write books and do research and dig deep into ideas. So I have that daily disconnection ritual. I do sleep with my smartwatch, which wakes me up every morning. And I don't get any notifications on the thing, but it's a beautiful alarm clock because you don't have this loud thing ringing in the room, and so it doesn't wake up my wife. And it just kind of taps you awake on your wrist. And so I am connected in some ways to technology, but less so to the internet. The internet is what I try to actively minimize. And so with COVID and stuff, we're spending more time in the digital environments that we occupy than before, right? That's just where our work is now. We're working around fewer people, and it's all gone digital. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but we have to also recognize that the internet is a candy store of novelty for our attention. And because the more novel stimulus, releases more dopamine, any addiction is essentially just an addiction to novelty and to the dopamine that novelty produces. And so that's what I try to minimize. I try to minimize social media, which I have to be honest, I'm not always perfect at. I do fall victim to the same mental biases that everybody else on the planet does, but I usually enable a distractions blocker. So I have an app called Freedom on my computer, which is a beautiful name for a distractions blocker, isn't it? We think, distractions blockers are supposed to be so restrictive, but the truth is they provide an unusual amount of mental freedom and clarity, and our mind can kind of sigh a sigh of relief almost when they're enabled. So that means when that's enabled, which it is between what do I have it? I think it's enabled until noon now. I don't even know the time because I've just kind of grown into patterns of working with fewer distractions, which people would over time if they used apps like this. So when it's enabled, I can't check the news. I can't check social media. I can't check email. I can't check basically any novel website. And so that's an effort to destimulate my mind, especially during COVID when there are so many forces that are pulling our minds in the opposite direction.
Yeah. Well, let's finish up. I noticed that you've been doing a podcast for a couple of years with your, I think she was your fiance when you started. Now she's your wife, Ardyn, Becoming Better. I sometimes have my wife on the show, and the conversations that we have with each other, it's a whole other topic. But when you sit somebody that you're in a relationship with in front of a microphone and you talk, it's different than the way we talk. But what are you trying to do with that podcast, and how has it evolved and changed in the 2 years that you've been doing it?
Well, what's fun is when I do a podcast with, whether it's an interview or with somebody else, nobody ever makes fun of me in a way that Ardyn does. She feels total leeway in that regard, which is it's kind of fun. But our intention is, becoming better, I think, is what life's all about. And we all have different things we want to become better at, right? Some of us want to become better communicators. Some of us want to become better leaders. Some of us want to become better at being productive and meditation. And so we cover all the things that we're becoming better at. We talk about the research, the science behind how these ideas are structured. We do experiments on ourselves, using ourselves as guinea pigs to become better. We talk about where we fail. We talk about where we succeed. We bring in lessons from our readers at the same time. And so it really is a podcast centered around this mission of how can we become better human beings. We're never going to be perfect, but we can always be a bit better than we were yesterday. And I think it is important to kind of separate that striving for becoming better with separating that out from that mindset of more. We always want to accomplish and accumulate more as a culture. We're not really talking about that stuff. We're talking about becoming better people so we can make a bigger difference in the lives of other people. And so, it's a bi-weekly podcast every 2 weeks, because I know people have different definitions for these words, but every 2 weeks we try to make people better, and including ourselves. So it's a good time.
Yeah, it sounds like it's fun to do. I have been speaking with Chris Bailey, author of How to Train Your Mind, an Audible original released in January. Thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you, Len.
That's it for this week. If you are on Clubhouse, I hope you will join me in the room that I will have again tomorrow, Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, to talk about the Chris Bailey interview and anything else that's on your mind. I think we had about 6 or 7 folks drop by. We had a lively discussion for an hour. It was really fun. So if you're on Clubhouse, you can look for the Reading Edge, which is a club that I created, and that will get you to the room. Or you can just look for my name, and I'm sure it'll show up. If you've got any questions on how to get to it, just send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com. And they keep giving me new invites, so if you would like an invite to Clubhouse, just let me know that same email, and I'll get you hooked up with an invite so you'll be in Clubhouse, and maybe you'll be in Clubhouse in time to stop by the room tomorrow at that's going to be March 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. My guest next week is going to be Ann Rittenberg, who is the literary agent in Manhattan, who has been representing Chuck Box ever since his 3rd novel. And, of course, his 21st novel just came out, the Joe Pickett series. And we talked to him last week or the week before. I've lost track. But I know Ann from before because she actually was representing a project I was working on at one point. She's a real powerhouse, just a terrific person to get a look into what's happening in the New York publishing scene. And in particular, she's going to have a great story about how she and Chuck Box, the cowboy from Wyoming and the Manhattan literary agent, got together, and they've obviously been doing really good work together ever since. Thanks for listening, and we'll be on the road in 2 or 3 weeks back up to Cambridge, but another couple of shows coming to you from Sanibel. I've got one in the works, one more person that can give you a taste of life on this really wonderful island that we've been on for now nearly 4 months. Thanks for listening. Bye.